Hi, Miss Anderson's class. Let's try and finish this today. All right, said Rob. He looked over his shoulder, wishing fervently that Willie May or his father would appear to save him from View Camp, knowing at the same time that he couldn't be saved, that he was on his own. Good, said View Camp. Climb on up. Rob climbed into the passenger seat. There was a big brown grocery bag at his feet. Go on and put that in the back, said View Camp as he swung up into the driver's seat. The bag was heavy and it stunk. Rob carefully put it on the floor in the back and then noticed his hands. There was blood on his fingers. That's just from the meat, said View Camp. It won't hurt you none. He cranked the engine. It roared to life, and they were tearing around behind the Kentucky Star and into the woods. View Camp drove like he was crazy. He gunned for the trees and then swerved away from them at the last minute, whooping and hollering the whole time. You ain't gonna believe what I got to show you, he hollered at him. No, sir, said Rob weakly. What? View Camp shouted back. No, sir, Rob shouted back. I ain't gonna believe it. But he did believe it. He believed it with all of his heart. Chapter 19. View Camp hit the brakes. We're almost there. You got to close your eyes so it's a surprise. Rob closed his eyes and the Jeep went forward slowly. Don't cheat now, View Camp said. Keep them eyes closed. Yes, sir, Rob said. All right, View Camp said finally. Go on and open them up. He pulled the Jeep up as close to the tiger cage as possible without driving into it. Tell me what you see, he crowed. Tell me what it is before your very eyes. A tiger, said Rob. He let his mouth drop open. He tried to look all excited and amazed. Damn straight. King of the jungle, and he's all mine. Wow, you own him? That's right, said View Camp. Fellow I know owed me some money. He paid me with a tiger. That's the way real men do business. In tigers. He come complete with the cage. The toothpick in the side of his mouth danced up and down. View Camp put a finger up to steady it into silence. What are you going to do with him? Rob asked. I'm studying my options. I figure I could set him up out in front of the Kentucky Star and have him draw me some more business into the motel. The tiger stood and stared at View Camp. View Camp looked away from him. He tapped his thick fingers onto the steering wheel. I also might just kill him, View Camp said, and skin him and make me a tiger coat. I ain't made up my mind. He's a lot of work, I tell you. He needs meat twice a day. That's where you come in. I need you to come out here and feed him. $2 every time you do. How's that sound? Rob swallowed hard. How do I get the meat in the cage, he asked. View Camp dug in his pockets and pulled out a set of keys. With these. He took the keys, shook the keys, and they gave a sad jingle. Don't pay no attention to the big keys. They're for the locks on the door. Open them up and that tiger will get out and eat you for sure. You understand? I ought not to give you this whole set, but I know you won't open up the door, right? You ain't no fool, right? Rob, terrified that the keys to the cage existed and that they were about to be handed to him, nodded. See this tiny key? View Camp said. Rob nodded again. That's for the food door, right there. View Camp pointed to a small door at the bottom of the cage. You just open that up and toss the meat in a piece at a time, like this. View Camp swung himself out of the Jeep with a grunt. He reached in the back seat for the grocery bag, took out a piece of meat, bent over and unlocked the tiny door. opened it, and threw the meat in. The tiger leapt forward. Bucamp took a quick step backwards, stumbling. "That's all there is to it," he said, straightening up. His forehead was shiny with sweat, and his hands were trembling. "What's the tiger's name?" Rob asked. "Name?" said Bucamp. "He ain't got a name." "You got a name for something before you toss it a piece of meat?" Rob shrugged and blushed. He bent over to scratch his legs so that he wouldn't have to look at Mr. Bucamp's sweaty, angry face. "You want to get introduced proper?" Bucamp said in a mocking voice. "Well then, get on out of that Jeep." Rob climbed down. Bucamp grabbed a hold of the fence and shook it. The tiger looked up from his meat. His muzzle was red with blood. He stared at Bucamp with a fierce look in his eyes that was familiar to Rob. "Hey," Bucamp shouted, "you see this boy here?" He pointed to Rob. "He's your meal ticket, not me. It's this boy. He's got the keys now. Understand?" "I don't got them no more. This boy's got them. He's your boy." The tiger stared at Bucamp a minute more, and then he slowly lowered his head and started back to work on the meat. "Now you two know each other," said Bucamp. He pulled a tattered bandana from his pocket and wiped the sweat off his forehead. On the hair-raising ride back to the Kentucky Star, Rob realized who the tiger's stare reminded him of. It was Sistine. He knew that when he told her he had the keys for the cage, her eyes would glow with the same fierce light. He knew that she would insist that now they had to let the tiger go. Chapter 20. The last thing Bucamp said to him was, "Don't forget now. This is our business deal. It don't concern nobody else. You take that bag of meat and hide it somewhere. I'll bring you more meat tomorrow. In the meantime, you keep your mouth shut." At 3 o'clock, the school bus pulled up, belching and gasping and sighing. Norton and Billy Threemonger started pelting Rob with date palms before the bus even came to a complete stop. The bus door opened, and Sistine came running towards him, dodging the dates, looking as serious as a soldier on a battlefield. "Let's go see the tiger," she shouted at him. Rob was dismayed to see that she was still wearing his shirt and jeans. "Where's your dress?" I blurted out. "In here." She held up the same grocery bag he had given her the night before. "I changed as soon as I got out of the house. My mother doesn't know. I found a book in the library today and read up about big cats. Do you know that panthers live in the woods here? We could set the tiger free and he could live with them." "Come on," she said. She started to run. Rob ran too, but the keys to the cage felt heavy in his pocket, and they bumped against his leg and slowed him down, so that Sistine beat him there. When he arrived, she was standing pressed up against the fence, her fingers wrapped in the chain link. "Tigers are an endangered species," she said. "It's up to us to save him." "Watch out he don't attack you," Rob said. "He won't." "Tigers only attack people if they're desperately hungry." "Well, this one ain't hungry." "How do you know?" Sistine asked, turning around and looking at him. "Well, he ain't skinny, is he?" "He don't look starved." Sistine stared at him hard, and Rob opened his mouth and let the word fall out. "Keys," he said. Every secret magic word he had ever known, tiger and cancer and Caroline, every word in the suitcase seemed to fall right out of him when he stood before Sistine. "What?" she said. "Keys," he said. He cleared his throat. "I got the keys to the cage." "How?" "Bucamp," he told her. "He hired me to feed his tiger, and he gave me the keys." "All right, now all we have to do is open the locks and let him go." "No," said Rob. "Are you crazy? It ain't safe. It ain't safe for him here. My friend Willie Mae, she had a bird and let it go, and it just got ate up." You're not making sense, she told him. This is a tiger. A tiger's not a bird. And I don't know who Willie Mae is, but I don't care. You can't stop me from letting this tiger go. I'll do it with or without the keys. I'll just saw the locks off. Myself. Don't, said Rob. Don't, she mocked back. Then she spun around and grabbed hold of the cage and shook it, the same way Bucamp had earlier that day. I hate this place. I can't wait for my dad to come and get me. When he gets here, I'm going to make him come out here and set this tiger free. That's the first thing we'll do. She shook the cage harder. I'll get him out of here, she said to the panicked, pacing tiger. I promise. She rattled the cage as if she were the one who was locked up. The tiger paced back and forth without stopping. Don't, said Rob, but she didn't stop. She shook the cage and beat her head against the chain link. Then he heard her gasp. He was afraid maybe she was choking. He went and stood next to her, and he saw that she was crying. Crying. Sistine? He stood beside her, terrified and amazed. When his mother was alive, when he still cried about things, she had been the one to comfort him. She would cup her hand around the back of his neck and say to him, You go on and cry. I got you. I got good hold of you. Before Rob could think whether it was right or whether it was wrong, he reached out and put his palm on Sistine's neck. He could feel her pulse beating in time with the tiger's pacing. He whispered to her the same words his mother had whispered to him. I got you. He told her, I got good hold of you. Sistine cried and cried. She cried as if she would never stop. And she didn't tell him to take his hand away. By the time they started walking back to Kentucky Star, it was dusk. Sistine was not crying, but she wasn't talking either. Not even about letting the tiger go. I have to call my mother, she said to him in a tired voice when they got to the motel. I'll go with you. She didn't tell him not to. So he walked with her across the parking lot. They were almost to the laundry room when Willie Mae materialized out of the purple darkness. She was leaning up against her car, smoking a cigarette. Boo, she said to Rob. Hey, he told her back. Somebody's following you, she said, jerking her head at Sistine. This is Sistine, Rob told her. And then he turned to Sistine and said, This is Willie Mae, the one I was telling you about. The one who had the bird and let it go. So what, said Sistine. So nothing, said Willie Mae. Her glasses winked in the light from the falling Kentucky Star. So I had me a bird. Why are you hanging around in the parking lot trying to scare people? Sistine asked, her voice hard and mean. I ain't trying to scare people, said Willie Mae. Willie Mae works here. That's right, said Willie Mae. She reached into the front pocket of her dress and pulled out a package of 8-ball gum. You know what? She said to Sistine. I know you. You ain't got to introduce yourself to me. You angry. You got all that anger in the world inside you. I know angry when I meet it. Been angry most of my life. I'm not angry, Sistine snapped. All right, said Willie Mae. She opened the package of 8-ball. And an angry liar then. Here you go. She held out a stick of gum to Sistine. Sistine stared for a long minute at Willie Mae, and Willie Mae stared back. The last light of dusk disappeared, and the darkness moved in. Rob held his breath. He wanted desperately for these two to like each other. When Sistine finally reached out and took the gum from Willie Mae, he let his breath go in a quiet whoosh. Willie Mae nodded at Sistine, and then she extended the pack to Rob. He took a piece and put it in his pocket for later. Willie Mae lit another cigarette and laughed. "Ain't that just like God?" she said, "throwing the two of you together." She shook her head. "This boy's full of sorrow, keeps it down low in his legs. And you," she pointed her cigarette at Sistine, "you're all full of anger. You got it snapping out of you like lightning. You some pair, that's the truth." She put her arms over her head and stretched, and then straightened up and stepped away from the car. Sistine stared at Willie Mae, with her mouth open. "How tall are you?" she asked. 6'2", said Willie Mae, "and I gotta get home. But first, I got some advice for you." "I already gave the boy some advice. You ready for yours?" Sistine nodded, her mouth still open. "This is it. Ain't nobody gonna come and rescue you." She opened up the car door and sat down behind the wheel. "You got to rescue yourself. You understand what I mean?" Sistine stared at Willie Mae. She said nothing. Willie Mae cranked the engine. Rob and Sistine watched her drive away. "I think she's a prophetess." "A what?" "A prophetess," said Sistine. "They're painted all over the Sistine Chapel. They're women who God speaks through." "Oh." He turned the word over in his mouth. He nodded. That sounded right. If God was going to talk through somebody, it made sense to Rob that he would pick Willie Mae. Chapter 22. "You out in the woods with that girl again?" his father asked as soon as Rob stepped into the room. "Yes, sir." "Look over here, son." His father was standing by Rob's bed. "Sir?" said Rob. His heart sank. He knew what his father had found, the meat. He had hidden it under his bed until it was time to go feed the tiger again. "Where'd this meat come from?" his father asked, pointing to the bloody brown bag. Without thinking, Rob said, "Bucamp." "Bucamp," his father repeated, low and dark. "Bucamp? He don't hardly pay me enough to get by, and now he's giving us rotten meat. He thinks I ain't man enough to put meat on my own table?" Rob wanted to say something, but then he thought of Bucamp and held his tongue. "I ought to teach him a lesson," his father said. The cords on his neck stood out like twigs. He kicked the bag of meat. "I ought to. Making me work for less than nothing, giving us rotten meat." He went and stood in front of the gun case. He didn't unlock it. He just stood there and stared and cracked his knuckles. "Daddy," Rob said, but he couldn't think of anything to say after that. His mother had known how to calm his father. She would put a hand on his arm, or say his name in a soft, reproachful voice, and that would be enough. But Rob didn't know how to do those things. He stood for a minute more, and then he walked over to his bed, grabbed a piece of wood and his knife. He left the room. His father was still standing at the locked gun case, staring through the glass at the deer hunting rifle as if he were trying to will the gun into his hands. Rob walked to the Kentucky Star sign. He sat down beneath it and leaned up against one of the cold, damp poles and started to work on the wood. But his head was too full of his father's anger and Sistine's tears. He couldn't concentrate. He looked up at the dark underside of the sign and recalled lying under a blanket, staring up at a big oak tree. His mother had been on one side of him, and his father, asleep and snoring, had been on the other. He remembered that his mother had taken hold of his hand and pointed up to the sun shining through the leaves of the trees and said, "Look, Rob, I have never in my life seen a prettier color green. Isn't it perfect?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, staring at the leaves. It looked like the original green, the first one God ever thought up. His mother squeezed his hand and said, "That's right. The first ever green. You and me, we see the world the same." He concentrated on the green. He let it seep through a crack in his suitcase of not thoughts and fill up his head with color. He wondered if Willie Mae's cricket had been the same bright and original green. That's what he thought about when he carved. So he wasn't surprised when he stopped and held the wood away from himself to see a wing and a beak and a tiny eye. It was Cricket, Willie Mae's cricket, coming to life under his knife. He worked on the bird for a long time until it looked so real he half expected it to break into a song. Then he finally went back to his room. He found his father asleep in the recliner. The gun case was still locked and the bag of meat was gone. He wouldn't be able to feed the tiger in the morning. He would have to wait until Bucamp bought him another package. Rob went and stood over his father and stared down at him. He looked at his heavy hands and the bald spot on his nodding head. He was memorizing himself and trying at the same time to understand him, to make sense of him, out of his anger and his quiet, comparing it to the way he used to sing and smile. Then his father jerked awake. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Rob said back. "What time is it?" "I ain't sure," said Rob. "Late, I guess." "Go get me that leg medicine." Rob brought him the tube of medicine. Outside the motel room, the world creaked inside. The rain started in again, and his father's hands were gentle as he applied the ointment to Rob's legs. The next morning, Rob put the keys to the tiger cage in one pocket and the wooden bird in the other and set out looking for Willie Mae. He found her in the laundry room, sitting on one of the fold-up chairs, smoking a cigarette and staring into space. "Hey there," she said to him. "Where's your lady friend at?" "School," said Rob, "but today's only a half day." He kept his hands in his pocket. Now that he stood before Willie Mae, he was afraid to give her the bird. What if it was wrong? What if he had carved it wrong, and it didn't look anything like the real cricket? "What you giving me them shifty-eye looks for?" "I made you something," said Rob quickly, before he lost his nerve. "Made me something? For real?" "Uh-huh. Close your eyes and hold out your hand." "I ain't," said Willie Mays, but she smiled and closed her eyes and put her enormous hand palm up. Rob carefully placed the bird in it. "You can look now." She closed her finger around the small piece of wood, but she didn't open her eyes. She puffed on her cigarette. The long gray ash at the end of it trembled. "Don't need to look," she finally said. The cigarette dropped to the floor. "I know what I got in my hand. It's cricket. But you gotta look at it and tell me I did it right." "I ain't got to do nothing," said Willie Mae, "except stay black and die." She opened her eyes slowly, as if she was afraid she might frighten the bird into flying away. "This is the right bird," she said, nodding her head. "This is the one. Now you don't got to dream about him no more." "That's right," said Willie Mae. "Where'd you learn to work a piece of wood like this?" "My mama," said Rob. "She taught you good." "Yes, ma'am," said Rob. He stared down at his legs. "I know a wooden bird ain't the same as a real live one." "It ain't," said Willie Mae, "but it soothes my heart just the same." "My dad said he ain't got no jobs for me until this afternoon. He said I could help you out this morning." "Well," said Willie Mae. She dropped the little bird in the front pocket of her dress. "I might could find some way for you to help me." So Rob spent the morning following Willie Mae from room to room, stripping the dirty sheets from the bed. While he worked, the keys jangled in his pocket, and he knew that soon Sistine would be out of school, and that she would demand again that he unlock the gate and let the tiger out. "Where's the prophetess?" Sistine asked as soon as she stepped off the bus. She was wearing a bright orange dress with pink circles on it. Her left knee was skimmed and bleeding, and her right eye was swollen. Huh? He stood and stared at her and wondered how she could get into so many fights in only half a day of school. Willie Mae, where is she? She's vacuuming, said Rob. Sistine started walking purposefully towards the Kentucky Star. She talked to Rob without looking back. My mother found out that I was wearing your clothes to school. She took them away from me. I'm in trouble. I'm not supposed to come out here anymore. I know you don't always got to get in fights. Sometimes, if you don't hit them back, they'll leave you alone. She whirled around and faced him. I want to get in fights, she said fiercely. I want to hit them back. Sometimes I hit them first. Oh, said Rob. Sistine turned back around. I'm going to find her. I'm going to ask her what we should do about the tiger. You can't ask her about the tiger, said Rob. Bucamp said I wasn't supposed to tell anybody, especially not Willie Mae. Sistine didn't answer him. She started to run. And Rob, to keep up with her, ran too. They found Willie Mae vacuuming the shag carpet in room 203. Sistine went up behind her and tapped her on the back. Willie Mae whirled around with her fist clenched like a boxer. We need some answers, Sistine shouted over the roar of the vacuum. Willie Mae bent down and turned the vacuum cleaner off. Well, look who's here. She kept her hand balled up as she was still searching for something to hit. What's in your hand? Sistine asked. Willie Mae uncurled her fist and showed Sistine the bird. Oh, and Rob realized then why he liked Sistine so much. He liked her because when she saw something beautiful, the sound of her voice changed. All the words she uttered had a sound to them, as if she was getting punched in the stomach. The sound was in her voice when she talked about the Sistine Chapel, and when she looked at things he carved in wood. It was there when she said the poem about the tiger burning bright, and it was there when she talked about Willie Mae being a prophetess. Her words sounded the way all those things made him feel, as if the world, the real world, had been punched through, as though he could see something beautiful and wonderful dazzling on the other side of it. Did Rob make it? Sistine asked. He did, said Willie Mae. It looks alive. Is it like your bird that you had to let go? Just about exactly. She looked at Willie Mae, then she turned and looked at Rob. We need to ask you something. Ask on. If you know about something that was locked up in a cage, something big and beautiful that was locked away unfairly for no good reason, and you had the keys to the cage, would you let it go? Willie Mae sat down on the bed. A cloud of dust rose up around her. Good Lord, she said. What you two children got in a cage? It's a tiger, Rob said. He felt like he had to be the one who said it. He was the one that found the tiger. He was the one that had the keys to the cage. A what? Said Willie Mae. A tiger, said Sistine. Do Jesus, claimed Willie Mae. It's true. Willie Mae shook her head. She looked up at the ceiling. She let out her breath in a loud, slow hiss of disapproval. All right, why don't you all show me where you got this tiger locked up in a cage? Okay, we're not going to get to finish this today, so hopefully we can get it done tomorrow.